Hey guys, Terry Carter here. We're ground zero for the 9/11 World Trade Centers that came down. And this is a perfect setting for an interview I'm going to be doing with Professor Stephen Jones, one of the leading scholars for 9/11 truth. So online with me here is Professor Stephen Jones, who was part of the Ancient Historical Research Foundation. He was one of our directors. He was our scientist, our archaeometrist, and slowly something happened to every one of us. And Steve, what happened to Steve is one heck of a story, and I want to have him tell his story about that because it has to deal with 9/11 and then some other things. So with that, Steve, tell me about your involvement with 9/11 and how you got started with it.
Okay. All right. Now let me just interject one thing, Terry. You'll have my 3 books available so people can see that link, which I just put out 1 week ago, actually, today. So one of the books is on 9/11, and the story is related there in dozens of pages, really. So I will try to condense that down. But if someone wants the more complete version, the unabridged version, they would need to go to the book, which is called 9/11 Research as a Full Professor of Physics, which I was.
And I'll put that in the description. I'll put that link to that in the description. So.
All right, right. And then there's 2 other books. But let's hop into 9/11. What happened? So in 2000. Well, things really started in 2005 when I had some friends encouraging me to study the collapse of the towers and World Trade Center 7. They said something really looks fishy there from their point of view. One of them was a physicist. And so I was thinking, well, yeah, I probably ought to look at that sometime. I just put it on the back burner, lots of things going on. 2006 rolls around, and spring of 2006, my wife and I went to hear a speaker. She was talking about food storage, things like that, emergency preparation. And that was interesting. But then she paused right in the middle of her talk, and she said, if you think that those World Trade Center towers came down just because they were hit by planes, you have some major surprises ahead of you. And about half the audience started applauding loudly, and I was one of the ones sitting there, what are you talking about? I don't really know. And so, remember, this spring, but we were out of school. I'd finished teaching, and so I jumped right into, on my own time now, really. I'm looking at World Trade Center 7. I say, okay, I've got enough nudges. I'm going to take a look at World Trade Center 7 and these other towers and just see what they really look like. And so I looked for the first time. I mean, on 9/11, I was like everybody else. I saw it on TV and I saw the towers. I don't remember seeing World Trade Center 7. Of course, that's 9/11, 2001. But now here we are in spring of 2006. And for the first time, I see World Trade Center 7 coming down. It comes straight down, and it accelerates very fast. I mean, it's moving fast. So I pulled out my stopwatch, which I had at a desk, and I had a stopwatch there. And so I pulled it out, and I say, okay, let's time this roof. And it comes straight down. So you time it at a certain point, and then it goes down. As far as you can see, I get around 6.5, 7 seconds. Then I looked up the data. Okay, how tall is this roof? I forget the number right now. It's in my paper. But so the free fall, and then I use the equation for free fall. It's not difficult. Y equals 1/2 gt squared. Solve that for t. Put in the height, and g is 32.2 feet per second squared. All those things, plug them in. It took me about, 5 or 10 minutes. Free fall is 6.5 seconds. And this roof comes down in 6.5 to 7 seconds. I thought, this is impossible because that building was standing moments before. It was not hit by a plane. is World Trade Center 7. Not hit by a plane. Yeah, there's some fires in it, but I later found out this day is the first time in history that a high-rise skyscraper, steel frame skyscraper, has completely collapsed, supposedly due to fire. That's the official government story. And it had never happened, except that day, 3 skyscrapers came down supposedly due to fire, but one of them wasn't even hit by a plane. This building 7. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. So I worked with a student, this fine young man, and he figured out a way to show a ball. So think of a steel ball dropping from the height of World Trade Center 7 roof, and just dropping. And we're going to neglect air friction even now, and just watch it accelerate. Accelerates at 32.2 feet per second squared. Now, so he put that in, and he got this nice graphic, and then he's very clever. He got the video that we have. We have several videos. He got one of the videos we have of World Trade Center 7, the roof coming down. He put them right next to each other. So here's the ball dropping at free fall. Here's the roof dropping at, by George, they are accelerating right together for a long distance. They're just right, exactly. It's accelerating. I mean, not just fast, but faster and faster, accelerating. And that's really, G is, if you drop something and there's something in the way, it slows it down, right?
Right.
Well, here's the roof of Building 7. It's got millions of pounds of steel and concrete, and it was standing just moments before, and suddenly the roof is in free fall. So I asked myself, Terry, I said, wait, you got to move all that millions of pounds of material, concrete and steel. It's not just steel, it's steel's trying to hold the roof up, right? You got to get that out of the way.
Right.
Immediately. All of it's got to go. And it worked out that it was over 100 feet and, just boom, accelerating down. How do you move all that material out of the way? There's only one way. If you can tell me another way, I'd like to know. The roof's intact, by the way. So it's not like, I don't know, it's not like a nuclear bomb or something that would blow the roof off. I mean, no, but what it is, there's some explosives in there. And then we came to find out later that there was a fellow inside. His name is Jennings. This is in my paper to this book here that I wrote. Anyway, he testified that there were explosions. He was actually inside the building. He was a New York City emergency guy. On 9/11, he went inside the building to check things out. And he was able to get up there. And on his way down, with a friend, there's 2 of them, on the way down, they heard and felt explosions. They could not get below. The stairwell was wiped out. They could not get below the 7th floor. Going down, they were stopped, and they had to go to a window, and a fire truck extended a ladder and got them out of there. I mean, they know there are explosions. This is before
they heard them.
They heard them. They were there. And this is before the main collapse. I mean, for people to say there are no explosives, like NIST, and NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, okay? So Congress charged them, explain the collapse of World Trade Center 7 and the towers. Well, they did the towers report, and then they come back and on the World Trade Center 7 report, they kept delaying and delaying and delaying. Finally, they came out with the report. And in this preliminary report for World Trade Center 7, they said, well, the building came down at constant speed. That's their term, constant speed. And you know the difference between speed and acceleration. If you're going 25 miles per hour, it's not very fast. But if you're accelerating from 25 to 60 in 4 seconds, you're moving right along.
Yeah.
You're accelerating, right? There's a big difference between constant speed and acceleration. They said it was a constant speed in the official government report. Of course, it's preliminary. They allowed for comment, so by email. And this is recorded, and the video is available. I have to link that. I think I do have it linked in the book. If you go to the video, I linked there. Anyway, so here's a question from Professor Stephen Jones. He says that we made a mistake, that the building is 7 is coming down with acceleration, a very rapid acceleration, and not at constant speed, as we say in our report. Would you please answer this question? So they have these 2 engineers hemming and hawing. Well, it can't be accelerating. It can't be free fall because there's material in the way, and they said that, and I agree with them. But it was free fall. So anyway, they finally said, "Oh well, we'll have to recheck this. We may have made a mistake," like that. And they didn't acknowledge that they had made a mistake then, but they went back in their final report. They show that sure enough, the building, and they show a graph. The roof of World Trade Center 7 is accelerating at 32.2 feet per second squared. That's what the data show from the videos. And so they admit that in their final report on World Trade Center 7. And I was not the only one, by the way, that caught them on their error. There's another physicist who's become a friend of mine now, David Chandler. And he also said, wait, this roof is accelerating. And at the same session where NIST was taking questions in, he said, you guys made a mistake. We got to check this. It's accelerating. So we both got him on that. And their final report, they corrected it. So you'd think that, okay, now they're going to explain, right? How can that roof accelerate at free fall? In other words, how do you get all the material out of the way so it's free fall?
The beams, the columns, all that's got to be out of the way for it to free fall. Yep.
The concrete, the floors, everything has to be out of the way.
The walls, everything. The walls,
right. If you take a piece of, just to drop a steel ball, maybe a little thin piece of paper in the way, so to slow it down, concrete will slow it more, and so on. Well, there's a lot of concrete, and it is at free fall. So anyway, they did not explain it. They sort of were forced to check because we caught them on the error that they had made where they said constant speed, but then when they said, okay, it is accelerating at free fall, but then they don't explain it. So they said, it's due to fire. And then furthermore, they said, we find no evidence for explosives. So I'm getting a little frustrated with NIST. And I tried to talk to him. I said, I want to sit down and talk to you guys. I mean, this is crazy. Are you trying to pull the wool over our eyes? And they wouldn't talk to me one-on-one. So I talked to a reporter, and it's in one of my papers. It's in the book. If you search on reporter, it'll bring up this story. So she in turn called the NIST spokesman. His name is Mr. Newman. And she said, Mr. Newman, you say there's no evidence for explosives in Building 7. Is that right? And he says, that's right. We found no evidence for explosives. And she said, because I told her what she should ask. She said, wait a minute. Did you look for explosives? You say there's no evidence, but did you look? And he said, no, we didn't look. She said, how can you say there's no explosives if you didn't even look? And he says, well, if you look for something that isn't there, you're wasting your time. Now, I say, is this a scientist? I mean, how do you know in advance? I mean, it's just circular, and it's total nonsense, garbage. The data shows free fall. That they had to admit. We caught them on their error. And then they come back in and say, well, there's no evidence for explosives, but you catch them on that because they said we didn't even look. And it's just crazy. And this is an official government story. So we sent Ines a letter. This is I and a group of friends, and we said, look, this is crazy. You're making mistakes. And anyway, they sent us back. They responded to some of the things that we asked about. At this point, in particular, I remember that we were asking about the towers. And we said, look, you never explained how the towers collapsed. That was your charge from Congress. So how did the towers actually collapse? And they came back and they admitted, but now remember, this is a letter to a group of scientists and engineers, including myself. They said, we cannot explain the total collapse of the World Trade Center towers. So, I mean, it's like, what? That's what you were charged by Congress to do, and you're admitting you can't explain it, you know? And anyway, this is again in my book. And there's a portion in there that talks about 14 points. If you just search on 14, it'll bring up that paper, which is a peer-reviewed paper, and I published a lot of this in a peer-reviewed journal, and now it's in this book. And I mean, you know, obviously not everybody's reading. What they read is the newspaper says, oh, NIST publishes, you know, 10,000 pages on these buildings. I mean, obviously that. But what I'm saying is, if you read, actually read a lot of that, and I caught their errors, several of them, and pointed these errors out in my papers. So that's what a lot of my published papers are about, is catching NIST and their errors, and also other observations that we made that NIST doesn't even talk about, such as the super thermite. You know, they don't discuss that at all. Oh, I could go on and on, but that's in the book on those details. Now here's the thing. So you're asking, okay, what about BYU? So here I am.
First off, before you go there, I just want to say, because I remember this clearly when all this went down. Before you went public with your findings, you brought me and White Eagle Sean in, and you showed us your findings, your presentation, and
right.
And I thought, wow. And I remember telling you, Steve, I says, Steve, man, if you go public with this, they will crucify you. And I don't know if you remember your answer to me, but your answer to me was, Terry, this is science. You know, it's I can't not tell the truth. You know, the data speaks for itself. And always when we was testing artifacts, ancient artifacts and things like that, you're the one that always wanted hard evidence. You're the one that wanted the facts. You know, some things that I thought was real, you said, Terry, the science doesn't support it. It's a fake, you know. And so you told me, Terry, I cannot, good conscience, not tell the truth, because you know, hard evidence is hard evidence. So, okay, if that's it, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, well, before that, let me say this.
I remember now. So,
before you go, before you go, let me tell you this. They did crucify you. So, anyways,
unfortunately, you were right. You were right, and not that okay, that's what I'm trying to do in these books too, is bring forth facts and truth and experiments. That's how in science we determine what's true, is by actually doing experiments. And that method it's called the scientific method, and goes back to Galileo, basically, and Newton, those guys, you know, 300, 350, 150 years ago. They said, look, this is nuts, reading what Aristotle says. You know, how many teeth are in a horse? Well, let's look up and see what Aristotle says. And he says, wait a minute, there's a horse out here, let's just go count the teeth. I mean,
yeah.
That's an experiment. It's an easy experiment. Same sort of thing with Building 7. You know, you can't tell me it's constant speed. I go out there and look at the data myself, and it's accelerating at free fall, or very close to it. And when they analyze it, they say, yep, sure enough, it's free fall. And then you say, well, why didn't you explain that? You know, NIST. But they didn't. So anyway, and by the way, there's a great new report just coming out right now. If you go to Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, they have an engineer at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, I think it is, right there, Alaska University, and he has studied Building 7 with all the whiz-bang math and checked, and he also points out that the NIST model, their conclusions of how Building 7 came down are erroneous. Okay, I mean they've skirted around the facts. This is what we're trying to say, and he's shown it again, which, you know, totally in agreement with him. So we're back though in 2006, and I was gathering data. I had Building 7, you know, I'd studied that out, and I decided I needed some peer review. So the way which I always seek, you know, and as an example of this, in September of 2006, I opened up a colloquium for faculty from any branch, engineering, physics, chemistry, geology, and actually from all over the campus. There's a psychology professor there, I remember. And geology was represented, and of course physics. And anyway, I just invited the faculty, not students, because I wanted peer review, so peers, right, professors talking to each other. I showed them the data. We spent 2 hours, and I said, take your kid gloves off, Let me know what I've done wrong here, what I did wrong. And so building 7, we show that, it's accelerating a near free fall. This is before NIST had come out even with their preliminary report. And and I said, so this acceleration shows us that they move the material out of the way. We go through that. And after 2 hours showing them the data, I thought it was pretty convincing. This is just after, I don't know, September, so that's 9, so it's about 4 or 5 months of researching. I asked them, I said, okay, guys, you tell me, should I study this or not? That's the way I phrased the question. Should I study this question about 9/11, whether the official story is correct, and trying to get at the truth, the facts based on physics? Should I do that? I wanted their feedback. Is there enough here to say, yeah, that's a good idea, or no? And so I took a vote, and there was only one who voted against it, and this continued study, and he was a geology professor. The next day, I was walking on campus, and I saw him, and I said hello to him, and he said, I've been thinking about it overnight. I've changed my opinion. I'd vote in favor of you studying 9/11. He said, somebody's got to do this, and you're off to a good start, and the facts are pretty clear already. I think you'd better go ahead and study it, publish it, do some science. And so nobody disagreed out of that faculty. There may have been some abstentions. I didn't try to count those, but of those who voted, everyone was in favor then, with this geology professor changing his mind. So I went ahead with the study. I talked to my department chair. I said, I'm doing this study. This is before that meeting. He said, it's fine. You're a full professor. You can study what you want. And so I had his approval. I'm going ahead, going forward. And then came April of 2006. Not getting much opposition, really. Okay, there's some saying, well, wait a minute. And that's in the book. There's a Professor Firmage, and he published a letter in the Utah Valley, it's now Utah Valley University, right? And in the letter, he said, no, this Jones is incorrect, because he didn't talk to me. He put a letter in the newspaper, the student newspaper, and that's his choice. But anyway, he said because the towers are hollow, like a aluminum can, and so they're easy to squash. And so I had already looked at the data. This is absolutely false. The towers were not hollow.
You got walls inside. You got still columns inside. They're not hollow.
Columns inside where the elevators went, and there's no office space. It was these huge steel columns. I mentioned the size of them. They go all the way up the center. So and furthermore, when the NIST report, when it came out, it said that half the load was borne by the interior columns and half by the exterior columns. So I mean, it's not hollow, right? And I said, if you're going to smash a aluminum can and say that's a tower, what you have to do first is tie a bunch of nails together representing the interior columns, put that in your can, then step on it.
Yeah.
See if it smashes.
Yeah.
And anyway, he stopped bugging me, and so there's a little fight. But it wasn't until the following April. So now we're in 2000. Now we're in 2006. Yes, because so what I said before, all that happened in 2005. This meeting, and I hope I got the dates correct. Sometimes it's back a ways now, but anyway, that's the facts. 2005 that I was doing the study. I started the study in spring of 2005, gave the colloquium to faculty in September 05. It was in April of 06 that I spoke at the Utah Academy of Arts and Sciences. I wrote a paper, abstract you might call it, short paper. I submitted that, and it was published in their journal with the date April 2006. So that was what I consider my first publication. It's the earliest date of any publication. But that's the one where I talked about thermite. See, so in the intervening months here, from September up to April, March and April, I've been learning about thermite and the evidence for thermite, which is considerable. But again, that's in my book. I don't know if I will mention one thing about that. So in both, all three towers and Building 7, in the rubble, there was molten metal. And scientists at WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, again in the paper, in the book, they studied this chunk of steel that they found in the rubble of World Trade Center 7, and they said it has a Swiss cheese appearance, and they analyzed it with an electron microscope. It's all good science. And they said, well, there's high temperature oxidation. These holes in the steel are very unusual. And they said there's high temperature sulfidation, sulfur. Where you get sulfur that will attack steel in Building 7. How do you do that? See, they don't have an answer. They just said, this is a puzzle. New York Times picked up on that. This was in some of my talks in that era, 2006. And I'm sure I mentioned it. I could check. I should check that sometime. But at this April meeting of the Utah Academy of Arts and Sciences. So the steel had been high temperature attacked with sulfur. How do you do that? What I was saying is that's just what you get. And I did experiments to show it's just what you get with thermate, which is thermite with sulfur added. And it's added in order to attack iron, because sulfur brings down the melting temperature for iron, brings it down. See, you got free sulfur. So you mix that in with your thermite, and you get this enormous heat, and boy, it's just going to melt and attack that steel.
So for those that don't know, when they do a demolition on a building, they use that. They attach it to the columns. They blow the columns and cause it to. So
let me say, it's interesting. They use explosives generally, and there's almost certainly explosive also used in these buildings. And there has been a demolition. It's in Architects and Engineers. They researched that out. That did use thermite. A form of thermite in the demolition. So yes, it has been used. And then there's another form of thermite called super thermite, which is explosive itself. And we found traces of that. That was after I had been early retired. So that would have been 2007 that I found that in the World Trade Center desk. That's all in the book. See, there's so much data. I hope you're getting the picture. There's just enormous data. Anyway, so back to the history. So I gave this talk at Utah Academy of Arts and Sciences. Other physics professors and professors are giving talks too. This is a well-known, established, it's a good venue. Everybody's happy with Utah Academy of Arts and Science. That's where I published my first paper. Okay, I'll come back to why that's important. Anyway, then I started, and it was in the Deseret News that, Jones is talking about thermite in the buildings, but obviously Al-Qaeda could not plant, thermite, especially thermite with sulfur added, in the buildings. I mean, no, they were in the planes. Well, so, something else is going on here, is what he's saying. Something else has got to be going on because the physics is telling us this. And of course, again, World Trade Center 7 was not even hit by a plane. So you can't use that excuse for World Trade Center 7. So anyway, I got all sorts of flack now. April. Ooh. Now you're talking, By the way, when you present a paper like that before a group of scientists and students now too, you're getting peer review. This is coming back at you, answering questions. And it was in the Deseret News. Jones says here, we found this evidence for thermite. And by the way, the NIST report talks about this molten metal coming out of the tower just minutes before it collapsed. They did not identify what that metal was. But I'm saying, yeah, that's consistent with thermite because it was this red, it was orange, yellow color, which aluminum doesn't anyway, I put all that in the paper. Aluminum did some experiments. When you pour molten aluminum, it still has a silvery appearance under daylight conditions. Okay, it's not orange yellow. And I even tried putting glass in there and organic material, and it's still silvery aluminum. Somebody said, "Well, it's the airplane melting." Well, it wouldn't have that color. But when you have thermite going off, then you get molten iron, and that will have this orange-yellow color. Oh man, there's so much evidence. In the rubble, they're pulling stuff out of the rubble, and there's this dripping red, yellow. Now it's cooled off a bit. Materials, but it's not aluminum. It's dripping off the beams as they're pulling out the rubble.
Wow.
Molten iron, So, come on. We just have so much data. Anyway, so now I'm starting to get flack. People are saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be studying this. What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing science. I'm doing experiments. I'm publishing my experiments. What do you want me to do?" Well, one of the things I'm going to see if I can make a long story short, because it's in the book, and the administrators are saying, "Well, read the handbook." So I read the BYU handbook. I read it thoroughly because I thought, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong here. But it doesn't say I'm doing anything wrong. It says you've got academic freedom, and it says if you do something wrong, the administration of the university will tell you in writing what you did wrong and give you a chance to correct your error. Hey, I thought, that's great, that's what I wanted to find out. Well, they never did that. So in September 7th, I think it was, it's in the book, they put me on administrative leave. And I asked, well, why is this? And they said, well, you read about it in the newspaper. In the newspaper, there's a short blurb.
They wouldn't tell you. They told you to read about it in the newspaper.
Read about it in the newspaper.
Wow.
So they have a press release. It's in the newspaper. And the newspaper says, well, and again, this is in the book in considerable detail. Jones is presenting theories. Actually, I was presenting experiments, but they call it theory. And we're not sure that his venues have been properly peer-reviewed, things like that. Or there's some objection to the venue. And I said, no, that's plural, venues. One of these, I've only published 2 papers at this point. One of them is in the Utah Academy of Arts and Sciences. And you say you don't like the venue. So that means you don't like that I published in the Utah Academy of Arts and Sciences. Please tell me what's wrong with that. And the other venue was a book by David Griffin. You may have heard of him, David Ray Griffin. And it was also peer-reviewed. And it was a book about 9/11 scholars challenging the official story. It's a peer-reviewed book. They may have rejected that, but I don't recall them ever telling me they did not like that book. So I don't know. So anyway, time went on, and I said, well, am I going to get a review? I want a review. I want to find out what I did wrong. Right? And also I want you to tell me what you think I did wrong. Maybe the university made a mistake. I'm thinking this. And it went on, and I had asked them in writing for a review. And I explain in the book some about this, but at the end, they said, no, we're just not going to give you a review. So other professors on campus said what they thought they were trying to do is to put a chill, because I didn't know this, but other professors were starting to study about 9/11 also, various aspects. And it just put a kibosh on all that. Probably not just BYU campus either, but other campuses.
So probably when other professors seen what happened to you, they got scared of studying it themselves because
I had professors
they crucified you. And I remember, Steve, because you came to us on our forum, Ancient Lost Treasures, and you had a secret forum, for scholars for 9/11 Truth. So I was privy to look at that. Other scholars.
It wasn't secret though. That was public, and that.
Well, you didn't know about it unless you was invited, right? You had to be invited.
I think you're right. Back then, there may have been an invited forum where we were studying things.
Yeah, and it was scholars like yourself.
The study.
Yeah.
Yeah. And out of that grew other organizations. The big one now, by far, is Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That's a dynamic group, and I forget, hundreds, I think, of structural engineers, thousands of engineers overall. I'm signed up in there, by the way, because before going to BYU, I was a senior engineering specialist at the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory. So I was able to sign up also with that group. In fact, I was one of the founding people for that. So it's really doing a good job. And but I wanted to mention one other thing. If I can remember what it was, it's flicking through my memory. I think that there is more. There's quite a bit more, but it's in that book. And rather than belabor, you get the flavor of what was happening there. Oh, there is one thing. Here it is, Terry. Hold on just a sec. So I retired. My retirement was effective in January of 2007. In April, so about 3 months later, 3.5 months later, BYU has a commencement exercise. And who do they honor with an honorary doctoral degree for public service? Dick Cheney. Do you remember that? It was the case. It was like 3.5 months after I was retired. And here's Dick Cheney speaking at BYU campus, standing ovation, and all the wonderful things he did. Well, he was one of the prime suspects. If you read the book by Kevin Ryan, 9/11 Suspects, Dick Cheney was right there. And Tarpley, another author, studied about what Cheney did Cheney was in charge, basically, in the it's the bunkhouse under the White House. PEOC, I think it is. It's command center under the White House, safe place. And he was in charge. Basically, he was directing. And there was no air defenses that day, so people, rightly so, point to him. And there's some evidence that he could have done something about the plane coming into the Pentagon, for instance, and did nothing. And so, I pointed this out in a number of my talks with some detail. The point being that Dick Cheney was highly suspect. The president was down in Florida, if you remember, reading to some children about goats. And anyway, he's in Florida, so who's in charge in Washington, D.C.? At the White House? That was Dick Cheney in charge. And there was no air defenses that day, which is also very strange, right? I mean, we have, I think it's $3 trillion air defense system. There were no air defenses that day. What happened, Yeah. Well, ask Dick Cheney. And I talked about Norman Mineta's testimony before the 9/11 Commission that specifically points to Dick Cheney as having done nothing with regard to air defenses for the Pentagon. So just look at my book. There's a lot of detail there.
Man, Steve, I'm going to get your book. You got me curious.
Yeah, you got to get it.
I'm going to get your book.
And I made it as cheap as I can. It's $2.99. That's as cheap as I can make it.
Man.
$2.99.
That's cheap.
It's real cheap.
So
and the book.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, okay. So I'm just saying that here I am talking about Cheney, leading up to it, and I actually remember one of the guys at BYU telling me, you really shouldn't talk about impeachment of Cheney, which I considered impeachment a fair trial, which is what I wanted, is a fair hearing. So I thought it'd be fair to give Cheney a fair hearing, a trial, which is called impeachment, but they asked me not to talk about that, so I stopped talking about that for a while. And then here they are turning around and honoring Cheney. Well, the newspaper said that Cheney had been in contact with BYU administrators before that, obviously, And so one of the things I point out in the book is that I just wonder how much influence Cheney had
in you
trying to get this research squashed.
Huh. Interesting. So, and the whole reason I wanted to bring this up, is because you hear the same thing with archaeologists, with archaeometrists, and that if they go against mainstream, what mainstream says happens, they lose their career. So archaeologists, archaeometrists, all kinds of scientists like that are afraid to go against. What do you think now that you've had it happen to you? Do you think that is a possible thing, or what?
It is a possible thing, and so I've decided not to just give up, though. So yeah, it was daunting and embarrassing, and at some level, but I was trying to maintain integrity and tell the truth. So I don't really feel like I should be embarrassed for that. So, but I did get.
Well, it's the way they tried labeling you. I remember listening to the radio when that was going on, and on KSL, the talk show host says this Professor Stephen Jones is a crackpot. I'm thinking he doesn't know Professor Jones like I know Professor Jones. He's not. Professor Jones is saying he's done the study. I know him. He just doesn't come off and say anything, without doing. Because I tried to get you to for the Padilla plates. I wanted you to say they was real, and you wouldn't. So.
Yeah, it's really strange how all that came down. It really is. But we do see an example here, like you say, Terry, that the powers that be, they don't really like the truth. They have a certain agenda. I mean, apparently somebody wanted to go to war with Iraq in particular. We know that Bush and Cheney were pushing for that. And it's in the document that came out, what's it called? It's in the book somewhere, but Plan for the New American Century, I think it was. So remember, this happened in 2001. 9/11, 2001, it's a new century. And in this book, The Plan, they're talking about hegemony, domination by the U.S. for this century. And they said, but to achieve this, we got to get the public behind us. We need something like a Pearl Harbor. They put this in the book. It was about 10 years before 9/11, 2001. And sure enough, they got their Pearl Harbor. But there's opposition. So, I mean, if you talk about, let me give you another example. This is my book, number 1. It's for sale right now. It talks about cold fusion. And that was a mess. I grant you, and I try to sort some of that out in the book. It was a mess because there's a kernel of truth there. And then there's a bunch of falsehoods, which is another way to fight truth. It happens inadvertently sometimes. I don't think, anyway, that's the whole story, but it's spelled out in book 1. What I'm trying to say is there's still a kernel of truth there about these, now it's called low energy nuclear reactions, which is a better term. It involves protons interacting with metal nuclei. And it's a type of fusion, but it's not deuteron-deuteron fusion. It uses ordinary water, H2O, which was the control for Pons and Fleischmann, so it's not the same cold fusion they were talking about. No, because that was their control. Instead, this is the reaction of protons with metal. You can use deuterons too. And this is being studied mostly in Japan and Italy because, again, the research has been pretty well squashed in the United States. Because, Pons and Fleischmann, their claims were too much, and they were, I remember talking to Martin Fleischmann, I said, look, there's no evidence here, and we've looked for neutrons, you've looked for neutrons. The neutrons are few. They don't correspond to the heat. So don't call it deuteron-deuteron fusion. That's going to cause you problems. And sure enough, it did cause some problems. And so, but there's a kernel of truth there, which is interesting, which actually was before Pons and Fleischmann. That's in my book 1. This guy over in New Zealand using light water and electrolysis and getting excess heat. He claimed it. The unfortunate thing was he wanted a lot of money up front before he revealed his secrets. And so guess what happened? he took his secret to the grave. He had a patent in 1945, though, long before. Bonds Fleischman was 89, right? So this guy's 1945. This is before I was born.
Yeah.
Okay. I was really old. Okay. So the point is, it's not a new idea, really, but it's just struggling to get out. And but I can say that we're approaching a point where, as I say in my book, I'm expecting a breakthrough in this field, low energy nuclear reactions, aka cold fusion, but not Pons-Fleischmann cold fusion. That's the caveat that you have to throw, because it's proton interacting, and it goes back before Pons-Fleischmann. Anyway, that after all these years, it does appear that we're approaching a breakthrough on that one. I believe we'll have it in the next 2 years, well, by the end of 2021. Because I look, I've been to the conferences, I go to the conferences, not all of them, obviously. It's a little too expensive. I don't have a big account at this point, but there's a conference over in Italy just about now, but I had missed that one. But it's on this cold fusion. I've got a good friend that keeps me apprised, a couple of them actually that I can talk to. But this one, he keeps telling me about what's happening. So I keep up on that pretty well, I think. And it does look like they're going to, myself too, I'm working in this field. It's star in a jar. You'll hear that concept if we succeed. And anyway, but again, we expect, so your question about suppression, we expect that. And you see what happened to cold fusion. There were some errors. And there was a legitimate challenge to those errors. But our work at BYU, which is on the low-level neutrons, that was verified. So that's a type of cold fusion, you see, that actually produces neutrons. Now there's this other type, which is proton metal fusion, which is going to sound crazy to physicists, but again, because the Coulomb barrier is so high. But that doesn't mean nature can't do it, because there's tunneling through the barrier. That's the trick, which is quantum mechanics. Anyway, there's lots of things going on there. The bottom line is experiments tell us, not highfalutin theories alone. You got to do the experiment. And that's what we're trying to do. So here's the plan, Terry. Let me just give you an example of what we're trying to do. If we can get this to, okay, I'm just going to call it star in a jar for a minute, which is a plasma in a light water and a cathode that's probably tungsten or tantalum, something like that, one of these heavy metals. So we're interacting protons from the water with the cathode, the metal. And we've got a plasma going on in there. That's the heart of this star in a jar, because the sun is a plasma, right? So we're looking at the heat output and the energy input. And people are making good progress on this, I claim. Okay, we'll see if we can get this. Yeah. So here's the trick. We get this, we get it so it's replicated. Now, we could say, well, okay, I got it. I'm going to go to the newspaper right now, like Pons-Fleischmann did.
Right.
No, you don't. You're going to get smushed if you do that, right? So I'm pretty sure you would. So instead, what you do is you say, okay, I've got friends in Italy. I've got friends in Germany, actually, and Japan. Some colleagues. This goes back to the muon catalyzed fusion days. They're very interested in energy in Japan, as you might guess, and also in Italy and other places. And so you contact friends. I've got a friend in Australia. I'm certain he'll do it, Brad. Once we get this going, say, here's the formula. This is what you put in the water to make it work better. This is the cathode you use, the metal we're going to use. This is the voltage. This is how you start it. This is, and so on. Now, you measure the heat output yourself. You measure the energy input yourself. The key is, are we going to get more energy out than we put in? That's what we call freedom energy. Yeah. And people say that's impossible, but you know what? There's some very strong hints. It's not impossible because it's a fusion reaction. What they're saying is impossible is penetrating that Coulomb barrier, but that's not impossible either because it happens all the time. It happens on the sun, penetrating the Coulomb barrier. Obviously not with metals, as far as we know, but nevertheless, it's what it is. It's Coulomb barrier penetration. That's quantum mechanics. It's not hocus pocus. It's physics. What's funny is that it's hard to convince people that we're going to a new realm now. Nobody's really explored this before. Even though it's been talked about since 1945, at least, we're going to do it. And then we're going to replicate it. And then we are going to publish. And I'm pretty sure people will say to me, well, you got to do the theory first. And I say, no, I don't. I have to do the experiment first. If it's replicated by, 5 to 10, maybe 15 or 20 scientists and amateurs too. I'm not going to restrict anybody. I know some people I can trust. We're just going to quietly, of course I'm talking about it, but that's all right. We're going to do this, and it might not be the star in the jar, by the way. That one might not work, but I think it will. It might be something else. We're talking about motors with magnets. We're talking about antennas and other. That's enough. There's several approaches. Those are in book 4, most of these. That's not published yet. So anyway, some of them are actually in book 1, I think. I threw a couple of those other paths that might work. So we're looking for this freedom energy. There will be some source of the energy coming in. I'm talking about creation out of nothing, ex nihilo. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about some untapped energy. See, and I know that's... Anyway, if you can just think about that as a new source, a novel source of energy. It has not been tapped before. There's nothing against the laws of thermodynamics that says you can't tap some other source of energy. Of course you can. But you have to find it first. That's the key.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. We're looking for this other source of energy. And then replicating it. And here's the idea. So we replicate it, and then we publish at the same time. Yeah, guys, I mean, they may be able to suppress, poor Steve Jones over here in Missouri, United States, because he's not even a active professor anymore. So don't listen to him. But how can they going to suppress, this guy over in Italy at the same time, a guy in Australia, and several scientists now in Japan, and they connect with Mitsubishi, by the way, over there, and Mitsubishi seems to provide funding for them.
Cool.
So, Mitsubishi jumps online. And plus you say, well, here it is, it's working. And if you read our scientific paper, you can actually do this in your home with,
really?
Several hundred. Sure.
So let me ask you this. So when you get it replicated and when you go to release it, man, will you do a video for me on it and release it that way? When you're ready to release it to the public, will you let me video your experiment?
Absolutely, Terry. You got a deal there.
Awesome.
We'll let you video that.
Awesome.
I'm not saying you're going to be the first one.
No, that's all right. I understand.
I got to have a peer-reviewed paper.
Yes, I understand that. Yeah.
And we'll do that, and we'll get it from Japan and Europe, and I don't think it can be stopped at that point. I mean, these guys, they can stop one professor over here, but they can't. I don't think they can stop a dozen people around the world. Plus, you say, well, you can do it in your home, and here's how you do it. It may be a little dangerous, so I'm not saying that's...
that might not be good if it's dangerous.
Careful about that. But in any case, we'll have it so it's replicatable, repeatable, and published, and then they can go ahead and denounce it all they want. Pretty soon it'll be in your home, see? Lighting your house, providing heat, and then they can say it's fake all they want, but the guy says, well, here it is at my house, it's working. I don't care what you got. Right. I like it. It's warm. Yeah. It is cheap. And in fact, it's much cheaper than coal. We're not burning gasoline, or we're burning water with metal. Burning is not quite the right term. Reacting hydrogen with metal.
Cool.
And in a nuclear sense, that's one approach, mind you. There's other approaches that might get there first. One of these is going to get there first, And I don't think it's far off. I really think 2 years, we'll have end of 2021. You can check me on that. Mark my words on that.
Cool.
So I totally agree with you. We anticipate opposition now. We anticipate that, but we're finding ways, thinking of ways to get the word out. We're trying to serve humanity here. There are people that want to make the beaucoup bucks. I talked to an inventor in Washington State. To give you an example, he has a device. He wants to show me. He said that there was a fellow who was very wealthy. He told me his name, but I wrote it down. It wasn't somebody I had heard of. But anyway, very wealthy, and they offered him $5 million for this device, for all the rights to this invention of his. There was one thing he said he was going to do, though. He said, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to put it on the shelf. I'm not going to let this out. I want you to sell me all the rights, and then you can't talk about it. And my friend in Washington said, no. He turned down $5 million in order to.
You know what's scary? You know what's scary about that is you hear stories about this all the time where the people turn down the money and then they end up dead.
Well, I hope he's not going to die. That's a little scary. But again, lots of people knowing. We're just hoping that, the rules of integrity and democracy and scientific method will prevail over the, if you know the term, Gadianton robbers is what you're talking about. Guys that try to suppress and kill and just control is what they want. They want control. They don't want truth. They want control. And that's a pretty sad situation. But we're in favor of truth, so we'll see.
Yes, we are.
And my wife's sitting over here, and she's open. Now, you predicted, Terry, that I would be, I think your word was canned or
crucified.
Something like that. Oh, that was the word, yeah. Well, I'm still kicking, though, see? So.
Yeah, you are kicking still.
Economically, yeah. But, so, anyway, hopefully we'll be able, by having numbers of us doing this, quietly until it's ripe, and then a whole bunch of us at the same time. That's the idea.
And with
I hope it works.
Steve, man, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And for those out there, man, get Steve's books, because there sounds like there's a lot of wealth of information in there. And
there is.
So
now, Terry, let me say one other thing. A lot of your viewers are going to be interested in Brewer Cave and Burroughs Cave, those topics are covered in my book 6, which is not published yet. And so that you can look forward to that. But these others, I think.
Let me say before you go farther, you was our scientist on Brewer's Cave and Burroughs Cave, and our archaeometrist. You did the testing on this stuff, so I can't wait to get that book. That'll be exciting.
That'll be coming along. Do you remember that conference we had? It was at BYU.
Yep.
And it was in 2004,
maybe? 2004, 2005? Maybe, I don't,
Yeah, it was AHRF, and we had Burroughs himself came and spoke. Remember that?
Yep, I remember that.
And, of course, Sean was there. Everybody was there. Yeah, we miss Sean. Okay, Terry, great.
Steve, with that, that's a wrap, and thank you.
Thank you, brother. We'll see you.